Eric, do we need to address the recent controversy, or should we just get right into the episode? What do you think here?
I mean, I don't really think it's a controversy personally.
No, it's so this isn't on us. And you didn't even have to make an apology. I want to say for the record.
I think everything was I think only good can come from what you're about to say.
Yeah. So you offered a sincere apology, even though you weren't the instigator of the whole Erictrexler, which we discovered in the episode. I'm pretty sure, if I'm just recalling off of my memory, it's a pen name, much like Samuel Clemens and Mark Twain. But you took it upon yourself. You bore the responsibility. You wore that mantle to say, hey, you know what, guys? There's been a lot of people mispelling, mispronouncing Trexler's name. It's Eric. There are two Erics here. And you extended the proverbial olive branch, which was dripped in, full olives. Okay, we're talking olive oil. It was like wet. It actually looked a little bizarre, but you brought it over, this stick, this object, and you said, hey, man, this is for you. Let's have peace. Okay, hands claps. Except Trexler did not, for some reason, accept that apology. As sincere as it was, I know Eric, I know the content of his soul, and I could tell you with 100% certainty that he was really reaching out, okay, trying to reach across the aisle, so to speak. And Trexler wasn't having any of that shit.
This is one of those times, rare moments,
yeah,
where I think we have a different interpretation of what occurred.
Oh.
I think Dr. Erictrexler,
yeah,
he perhaps identified that I was apologizing and did accept it, but did not need it because he has ascended. He's now an enlightened soul, as he shared with us, that he has evaluated his inner human nature and realized that he can slew off, SLOUGH, however you pronounce that word, off. Yeah. The weaknesses of the mortal coil, and become an ascended soul, which is great for all of us, because his content is just going to get that much better and won't be laced with insecurity anymore. So I think this is a great thing.
And now it explains to me, so in defense of Trexler, before we get started, it explains to me why he simply does Instagram story reposts and he doesn't actually take the time and care to actually produce original content on his social media platform that can be utilized in order to entice potentially new viewers into Stronger by Science or Erictrexler's coaching. Why he simply just does a repost, right? I thought it was born of laziness, but to me, it's the simplicity that he's trying to espouse in everything that he does. Take me at face value. These aren't my ideas. This isn't what someone that I'm saying. This is what someone else is saying. So no authorship on it, right? It could be, as he said, who is Trexler really? And so he's removing himself. So that was really, it was profound when I realized that I was dogging him on something that extended far beyond fitness. And that's on me. And I'm going to have to do some work. So I just want to say to the
he ended up being go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just going to do intense inward reflection after this. So I want to note that. Sorry, Eric. Yeah.
No. It was almost like Dr. Trexler was a mirror for us, and our own insecurities were reflected in his, I would say, Buddha-like form.
Sure.
So I shout goes out. Not that he needs shouts anymore, to Dr. Trexler, and you keep reposting because we know you're doing bigger and better things.
Yeah.
Like ascending to the next level of enlightenment, while also writing great articles about P ratio. Yeah. So I think nonetheless, I do know the upside of maybe not taking the olive branch, and we did say it's time for this year of reconciliation. Any feud between podcasts is now over, and it is over, Omar.
Yep.
So this is a year of reconciliation. And even though they didn't take the olive branch, the fact that it wasn't needed means there's no more conflict, at least on the Trexler side of that equation. So it remains to be seen how Greg Nuckols responds to this news, if he even addresses it.
Yeah.
We know he's an avid listener, so we'll see where he goes.
I'm glad we got that out of the way, because unrelated to that, in today's episode, we're doing a first. We're listening to you and we're responding. Okay, we're going to do a fitness iron culture Q&A, answering your training and nutrition questions. And there are those, Eric, that's why, so it's unrelated, and now I'm bringing it up. Sure, Trexler just so happens to be the host, the only host of Stronger by Science. And sure, on occasion, they do fitness Q&A podcast episodes where the majority of the episode is dedicated towards answering listeners' questions. And there are those, they said, who are they? I don't know. But they would say that, iron culture, it seems like you're kind of biting the Stronger by Science style. Can you just lay the smack down, Eric, real quick, just before we answer the questions? It's not a controversy. We're just simply stating fact, the reality of our existence. Go ahead.
We're getting ahead of it, I think is probably the appropriate term, Omar.
Yeah.
Let's just be clear.
Yeah.
We've been doing Q&A episodes to end each season of the 3DMJ podcast for years. So not that anyone's saying that we are copying, Stronger by Science by doing a Q&A episode, but if they were, they would also have to acknowledge by that same logic that Stronger by Science was copying the 3DMJ podcast. And Omar, can you tell me who is frequently a part of the 3DMJ podcast?
So you're wearing a hat that has 3DMJ on it, and I read online that you are one of the founders of 3DMJ. And I'm stating this because I don't want to speak for you, but it would appear that you were there since its inception over a decade ago.
I don't want this to sound like I'm bragging, but that's not an inaccurate statement. I am, for those who don't know, part of 3D Muscle Journey, and that is also a podcast I'm on. So I can't exactly copy myself. Can I copy myself? Do I need to sue myself for plagiarism? Omar, write this down. We'll get in touch with our lawyers. I know they're quite busy with Egypt, but nonetheless, I don't think anyone could accuse us of copying ourselves. So this is just carrying on of the tradition that, as far as I know, we started.
So, beautiful. Address something from the past, look to the future, and here we are in the present to answer the questions. And before we do, I will take a moment, and we're just scrolling down the list, and because, guess what? Eric, my dude, is in New Zealand. That would be interesting, by the way, next episode when we read one of the audience reviews, because it's geotagged to where you are. So there's bound to be at least 1, 2, 3, if not, let's just make one up, reviews in New Zealand. I have here the Canadian review, so I'm just scrolling down what's the most recent one. You could go ahead and leave a rating review on iTunes. That's the chief place that we tend to look in where you can rate us out of 5. I'll read the most recent 2 after the ones that I read 2 episodes ago. Okay, Eric, guess what? 5-star, pretty cool. Thank you. Bright red kiwi. Oh, hilarious and educational is the title. Sometimes life gets in the way and you can't read all the research on PubMed, then compare data and see all the biases. Others have all the time in the world, follow keto diets and intermittent fasting. Sadly, the former applies to me. These guys talk to the best in their respective fields, lay out all their credentials, and stick to the actual science. They make it all accessible and genuinely want to help people out.
You just warmed the cookies in my heart, and I tell you what, they were cold before.
And now they're baked.
I feel now, they smell good. It's like walking by a Subway when you put your nose to my chest.
It is.
Sounds weird.
Nope. Didn't sound weird to me, Eric. And then the other one that I'll read is 2 below it. It's 5 stars from Sean Bean. Thank you, Sean. And it says, "Hey Google, what's stuck together?" It says, "The stuck together references have tampered with Google search suggestions when you search for the movie. You've made it, guys." That's amazing.
This is what we wanted. It is a retroactive renaming of a movie.
Yeah.
I couldn't be more proud. We've left our imprint on Hollywood.
And now it's kind of like in Star Wars, most people remember as Luke, I am your father. And the line is, no, I am your father instead. So it doesn't matter what happened in the past. So what the studio released the film as, apparently, ostensibly, stuck on you.
Wait.
Yeah.
Wait.
Look it up.
The line is not actually, Luke, I'm your father?
Bro, look it up. So I'll read one of the questions if you just want to verify, because I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure.
I don't know if I want to verify anything. I think I just want to sit in an existential crisis right now.
So they call it's one of the things from the Mandela effect, where things that people potentially misremember. But look it up. Let me know. What I will do in the interim, Eric, I will read our first question we asked on Instagram, and we'll do this again so you can follow us on Iron Culture Podcast. We're going to answer one of your questions here, and we're probably going to be doing this for the next 75 minutes. So we hope to get, I mean, it depends upon the length of the answer, but we hope to get anywhere between 6 to 10 questions. And here we go. The first one would be, my first two movements that I love the most, squat and deadlift, are improving, but I always seem to be plateaued with the bench press. How do I get beyond this bench press plateau? And Eric, I don't know if at first you want to give your own anecdotal personal experience, because I know you had great success at changing things up with your bench press, and then a general answer that's applicable for most people, because we don't have, unfortunately, because these questions are, one sentence, 2 sentences, we don't have all the details, right? We don't know the person's training history. And so we have to give kind of very general answers here.
Well, first, do we know the name of this person?
I can find the username after. So let's assume it's Darth Vader.
All right. Well, that's appropriate, because I think the first thing I need this person to know is that the line is actually, "No, I am your father." And if you never bench again because of this revelation in your life, I would understand that.
Yep.
And if you do decide to take a couple years off benching while you digest this monumental cultural shift that honestly has rocked me to my core, the good news is that when you come back to benching, your bench will rapidly progress to the point where you're now plateaued. And at that point, I'll give you the answer, which will help you for 2 years from now, once you've recovered from your existential Star Wars crisis.
Yeah.
So, so anecdotally, what Omar's referring to is that the bench press, for me, did respond quite well to an increase in frequency. I mean number of days per week. And to some degree, this seemed almost independent of volume, because I did try, 3 days of pretty serious benching prior to the point where I actually got the needle to move, if you will. And interestingly enough, there is, you know what? We're going to keep putting that olive branch out there. Greg Nuckols has done some independent meta-analytic looks at gaining strength and the relationship with frequency. And the bench press is one of the lifts that seems to have a good benefit in terms of strength of increasing frequency. So that's certainly one viable option. I think this is also useful if you've been kind of manipulating other variables and you have not tried frequency. If you've been, maybe trying different loads, different rep ranges, and you got your 2 days a week, you're kind of standard, maybe upper, lower, or 2 bench days per week, depending on what your approach is. And maybe you do variations, maybe you got some slingshot. If you've kind of moved all the other program variables around, but you haven't manipulated frequency, definitely something to give a try. Other things that can be useful are going to be very situation dependent. But I think kind of the clue, the hint here is, if there's something you have not tried or something that has not been on the table, like going over X number of frequency, that is an option. But it is very individual specific. Some other things I've found to have worked previously: people who have a really good arch and a limited range of motion, and they're very good bench pressers, but aren't necessarily getting, I would say, a great stimulus from the bench because of that, because they're kind of quote unquote gaming the system, which is great. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing from a strength perspective. It's kind of like doing the Fosbury flop. You're going to get a higher high jump. You probably need to do some work to ensure that you're actually building muscle mass and strength at all those other joint angle ranges that you're not getting from just doing that limited bench with a large arch. So you can try, feet up, moderate grip bench, so you get a much larger range of motion. And you can do other pressing variations like an incline to increase the range. And those are some useful variations if you do a lot of quote unquote competition benching. And that's something that is, helps you peak your bench, but not necessarily grow it. And you can figure out different proportions of time to spend on that. So if you're far from when you're going to try to peak your bench, you only do maybe 1 day per week of say the competition style bench with more work on accessories and larger range of motion. Pauses, things of that nature. And then as you get closer and closer to wanting to peak your bench, you shift that volume towards doing more competition bench. And those would be my not knowing much kind of advice.
Yeah.
But of course, there could be some very different specific things going on. You might be actually gaining strength, but maybe you're losing 2 pounds a week and you're going through a pretty hardcore cut. And I would argue that, holding on to your strength in that scenario would be great, especially on the bench. It seems very dependent on body weight changes.
Yeah. And one thing I actually would add that's been my observation amongst lifters that send in either Instagram stories or just ask for advice would be potentially the consistency of their actual technique when it comes to execution. So oftentimes, if you're a newbie, if you're an intermediate lifter, you might be benching more akin to a touch and go. So it might be an extremely light pause, but you might be planning on competing, let's say in a federation, let's say it's an IPF affiliate, and it's a much longer pause, and you think to yourself, oh, it's roughly in the ballpark. It's kind of like you're squatting, and you think, yeah, it's roughly the depth, and then it comes time actually to compete, and lo and behold, you're 5-10 kilos short, and the number that you thought you could hit, you're well off the mark. I think the bench press is one of those lifts that sometimes in some lifters, not that you'll cheat, but either you'll rush the press command or much of your repetitions will look more similar to a touch and go. And it depends upon your overall bench press style and how much that would affect things. But then when you enter the program, so let's say you have the program or your coach or someone you're working with, and you enter your max or your working weight, you're working with potentially a heavier load than what you should be across the board. So it's like, wait a second, now I'm working all the way up here. And then I seem to get stapled when it comes time to do the lift that I should be doing, even though, I put in all the time and effort and I could do, 150 kilos for 3. Well, why can't I do 160 for 1 come competition day or whatnot? So it's just been, I think, due to some of the inconsistency, not even with judging too, but with the bench press technique that an individual has is where there could be maybe some of that variability then in performance.
I would agree.
What do we got here? So there are some personal questions like related to us competing or what have you. But one that is a very basic one, Eric, that I think will launch off of the whole frequency question. It's intermediate lifter, so the person's an intermediate lifter, one, and he wants to know the optimal split. So we've had this conversation before. It comes in many different iterations here, but he's asking between a push-pull PPL, so push-pull legs, and maybe it might be a PPL rest, PPL rest, so it's like a split like that, or full body. What would serve him best for size and strength? And this is the broadest question one can ask. I think the way to set it up, Eric, would potentially be that those two splits are essentially trying to manipulate all those variables that are very important, such as the volume, the frequency, the intensity, in order to deliver the response that would be important, that would be necessary for you in order to drive change, in order to have that stimulus for growth. And how you organize those days is dependent upon your goal and the context of the lifter itself. Meaning that a push-pull legs can work fantastic for someone and full body can work fantastic for someone. It all depends upon the individual nuance of those said variables.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to add to the question that was asked. I would say that probably the most useful thing I can tell this specific question asker is to not look for an optimal split or an optimal program. And anyone who is pitching you that as a thing maybe doesn't really know what they're talking about. Yeah. To give you some input here as to kind of what are the constraints of what is within the realm of what could be optimal from the data we have. You'll often hear me say, and it says in my books, and there is some data to support this, but that training each muscle group or each lift at least twice per week or more is a good general kind of minimum. But the more and more research that comes out right now, I think that's probably true, but I think the effect size is quite small, and it does seem to be more that frequency, and this is something I've always said as well, so that's good, is that frequency is primarily a tool to distribute and manipulate volume. So there may be a point as an intermediate lifter, this is often the case, where bumping up your total amount of training stress that you do is the ticket to making continual progress past the novice stage. And you may find that a higher frequency works better for that. It might be difficult on, let's say, just to push-pull legs to get the volume or the stress you need before you can recover again with that split, but not always. Certainly not the case. So really, frequency or a split is just a delivery vehicle for the amount of volume and the total training stress you need, rather than being inherently better than something else until you start to really get into very, very low frequencies per body part where you're training something less than once per week, which I wouldn't advise.
Yeah. Eric, I think actually this is an interesting question for us because this individual wants to know why in your programs it seems like direct ab work is actually lower than what I tend to see online. And I assume probably they're talking about, when I say fitness gurus, individuals that talk a little bit more about abs, like getting abs and what you need to do. And so I would put forth, we actually had an episode, I think, where we were talking once again about our own experiences, where maybe it came about yourself, a contest prep, the frequency with which you train abs. But I guess the way I'd frame the question to you, Eric, on the other hand, why does it seem that a good swath of coaches, let's use the quotations here, in the evidence-based community, even if it's size, so even if it's more hypertrophy related, so 3DMJ coaches, if you were to take a look at 3DMJ coaches, world-class natural coaches, and how they program and the exercise selection versus your typical, when I say online guru, someone that is talking specifically about obtaining abs and having, the Hollywood physique, or in whatever way that they phrase it, you'll tend to notice that the frequency and the total volume of direct ab work is a good deal higher from those that are focusing on achieve the leanness than maybe some of the programs that you'll tend to see online from, 3DMJ or whatnot. And so that's the way that I'd set that up real briefly. Like you see programs of people hitting abs 3 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 times per week. So why is that potentially not necessary for someone that wants abs?
Yeah, this emerges from a couple of anecdotes. So I have really dominant abdominal muscles, and this is just something I noticed in my own training. Like they're just big, and I haven't done I do almost no direct ab work except when I was a kid and I did martial arts. Maybe that's why I have prominent abs. Don't know. But I have seen really not much of a difference in my physique. So that was my initial kind of anecdote. We're talking 2004, 5, and 6.
Yep.
Then as I became a coach, I was savvy enough in a personal trainer to realize, well, my own anecdotes are not necessarily applicable to others. And when I would have bodybuilders with not great ab development, I would, give them more ab work. And that's the logical thing to do. And I would still suggest you do that if you are someone with not great ab development. But it would rarely make much of a difference that I could tell. Nothing that I could gauge as a coach, we did X, and then, that it resulted in Y. And so much of the time we see that having prominent ab development is just a reflection of being lean enough. And I think a lot of people who think they have poor ab development are just unable to see their abs, or they don't like their body fat distribution.
Yep.
So certainly, don't get me wrong, anytime I have a client or if I recommend it to someone and they don't have great ab development, the idea would be to try to do a little more work for their abs, of course. But I think people don't realize just how much the abdominals are engaged on so many movements. Yes, spinal flexion is an action of the abdominis rectus, but they are involved in bracing and stabilization in almost any movement that you can imagine. So I think people underestimate the amount of indirect work they get. And if you take someone who does a relatively consistent training program that has a decent amount of exercise variety with a lot of free weight lifts, you'll be surprised that they're relatively strong in some of the movements that they are untrained in, quote unquote. Like if you hold a plank and you do squats, deadlifts, bent over rows, lunges and all that stuff, you can hold the plank a really long time. And the 1 minute challenge is kind of like, I'm bored. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
So I think people probably get a pretty large stimulus indirectly from everything they do, and that does add up to a lot. So typically in my programs, you'll see 3 sets of abs a week, direct work. And certainly if you're someone who has not great ab development and it's not just a leanness thing that you're mistaking, feel free to do more.
Yeah. I think for a casual lifter, it's also not only about efficiency, but it's about, okay, what are some of the overarching goals? And I think in 2 scenarios when potentially someone's trying to answer that question, as you said, Eric, they might not be lean enough, so they might not be able to see their abs that they already have, or they might be too much of a novice where they haven't put in enough time in the gym overall to build abs to see them in the first place. And oftentimes it's one of those things that if you train compound movements or you just focus on other things, and as you said, bracing, I've never had my abs more sore than, let's say, a max out set of the overhead press, where it's constant bracing, lifting over the head, and just the tension that's being exerted. Maybe other than, I would say, ab wheel rollouts. it's a function that's something that tends to happen over time. And to your point, Eric, what you said, if someone is deficient in it and the volume needs to be increased, sure. But I think most people, when they ask the question, why don't I have abs? It's like, you're not lean enough, or maybe you haven't been lifting long enough overall.
100%. Yeah, I think, this is not specific to abs, but I think we've talked about this. You've mentioned it many times that when people do a cut, when they don't have much training age under their belt and they haven't developed much muscularity, they are typically disappointed with the results of that cut. And they often, because they're also not that experienced, they mistake a lack of development for not actually have lost as much fat as they think. And I did this even with a fair amount of training experience under my belt. I remember the first true cut I did, I'd been lifting for 2 years and I was around 220. And because I started as a skinny kid, I just assumed that any weight I gained was muscle and any weight I lost was probably fat. So I thought, well, shoot, I'm 200 pounds. If I drop 20 pounds, I get to 200, I will be pretty much in stage shape. So I'll just do this 12-week cut, take it slow, and we'll see how it goes for the future. I'll get pretty lean. So long story short, instead of having to lose 20 pounds to be in stage shape, I lost about 26 pounds to get down to about 12% body fat, which is what I thought I started at, just to show you how off my understanding was. And I looked like okay, but I just looked like a slightly more muscular version of myself at about the leanness that I started at when I first started lifting before I started force feeding. So it wasn't really an accurate perception.
Hey, Eric, launching off of that, looking down here, there's someone who says they are a former fat powerlifter, now trying to lose some weight for the first time and make some lifestyle changes. Any advice? So I like the way the person phrased it, joking around, former fat powerlifter, but lifestyle changes, because oftentimes it could be predicated upon not an insecurity. Someone wants to change, like they have a goal. Oh, it's beach season. When they say lifestyle changes, that kind of strikes me as the idea that someone's looking for a sustainable nutrition paradigm in order to make something that will last and something that can be a new them, a new normal for them. I would say quickly before we go on, Eric, that I actually think Alan Thrall, because he's a little bit more from that slice, he has a few videos on him losing weight or him just talking about his own journey that's not just aesthetics focused. So there is that drive, I want to look a certain way because I visualize myself a particular way and I'm happier, or I think I'll be happier when I look that way. And then there's, like I'm walking up the stairs, man, and I'm getting out of breath. I'm going to tie up my shoelaces, and you know what? I feel the blood pressure going on. The belt, the way the clothes fit me, or even when I try and do basic physical activity, I might be lagging behind. I don't want those limitations anymore. And so they're starting from a position, I think, just to give a little bit more context, because I know this person asking the question, or I've interacted with them a little bit on Instagram, would be that the person found value in developing that strength and a new sense of identity and self-worth. So that's kind of the aisle that they went in, and then probably due to the COVID and the pandemic and the lockdown, being removed from lifting. So you go from, I've gained 50 pounds, to squat 500, 600 pounds, and it feels really good. And I'm tied to that attachment of myself and my accomplishment, to now the gym. So that stimulus is removed, and I just have this excess body weight. So I applaud, first off, you, my man, I won't say the name, for trying to make those lifestyle changes, and also the way they framed it. Where would they start, Eric, in your advice? For someone who's never been, in quotations, lean, and the prior training history is one more directed towards performance, and they're looking to incorporate this long term.
Yeah, I think to echo Omar, you're on the right track, and I think your mindset's in the right place based on the verbiage. And I really do just have a sigh of relief when someone tells me that their rationale for losing weight or wanting to get leaner, and it's not about fixing some aspect of themselves they hate. When it's moving towards something they're excited about, feeling better, being more athletic, being able to do X, Y, or Z, and realizing some of the non-aesthetic benefits like you talked about, like, I'm just gonna feel a little less heavy when I go upstairs, like you said. I won't have to spend as much money on food. In the case of like Alan Thrall, feeling like I'm force feeding at each meal and actually being able to enjoy food like a little bit more of a normal person rather than gotta get it down, baby. And I think there's a lot of really positive things there. So moving towards something There's actually been research on goal setting recently that I reviewed in mass, and it's something that I think we've talked about in Iron Culture. I could be wrong, but essentially, approach-oriented goals are more likely to succeed than avoidance-oriented goals. And what that means is exactly what I was saying before. If you have a goal to achieve something or accomplish something, you're moving towards something, approaching it, that is typically more likely to succeed than something where you're trying to avoid something. Because one requires you to eliminate a behavior without replacing it with anything, and it gives it a psychological sense of deprivation and avoidance, which, best way to think about a pink elephant is for me to tell you, don't think about a pink elephant, right? However, on the other hand, an approach-oriented goal, it asks you to adopt things and make changes and take a step towards action. And it's much more easy to frame something negative and that is self-deprecating, either implicitly or explicitly, when it's an avoidance-oriented goal. I want to be less fat, right? Versus I'd like to be leaner. One has a certain air of possibility and self-worth, while the other is a kind of, I'm trying to fix something that's broken. Yeah. So anyway, long psychological, philosophical diatribe there, but what I'm getting at is the fact that you're saying lifestyle changes, I think is a really positive thing. And I think the advice I would give you is to focus on the processes, sustainable processes in your life, which are likely to support the outcome you're trying to get rather than the outcome itself. And this, I know we've talked about this on Iron Culture before, how being too focused on the end goal can actually subvert the achievement of it. And that's been shown in multiple domains acutely. And I would say there are associations that show that relationship longitudinally as well. So essentially what that means is look at other things you can improve, like how's your hydration? How's your fruit and vegetable intake? How's your step count on a day-to-day basis? And do you have a semi-regular meal schedule? How much structure do you have in your day? Could you add more planning? Do you get an opportunity to get out into the sun early in the morning? And are you looking at, blue screens after dinner? Are there ways that you can improve sleep hygiene? And just focus on just getting as many new habits surrounding those processes to ingrain them. And you will look up after having done this for a couple years of just knocking down these new processes, and you will probably see the results reflected in your physiology, which is awesome. But if you are just wholly focused on getting lean, everything becomes a means to an end. Yep. It's more difficult to adopt those means as actual habits and lifestyle changes, and they are things you are trying to do to get somewhere. It's like this tool that you just discard and put back on the rack afterwards, which is, in my opinion, a large part of why we see sustainability of weight loss as an issue in our society and generally. So I think you're probably on the right track. This may not be anything new, but I would just say well done thus far, and good luck.
Good luck, my man. Jonathan wants to know, he says, do you offer online coaching? I don't, but let me set this up for you, Eric, because I know a group of individuals. They're extremely dedicated, some might say. They might even have some desire. Maybe, yes, Eric, I'm going to say it, some discipline too. 3D Muscle Journey. Wow. Brad Loomis, Jeff Alberts, Andrea Valdez, Alberto Nunez, Eric Helms. Coaches that tailor the needs and wants of the individual, that will listen, will give appropriate feedback, be there for you. I can only speak in a small microcosm of Eric helping me get less fat 2 years ago, where he said, just put the fork down. It was the one text, and then I would ask him questions, and then I would just be left on red. I understand that's what tough love is now. But there is a fantastic group of individuals, 3D Muscle Journey in all seriousness, that Eric helped co-found. And this is a perfect tee up, my man, because I do think the role, and we could talk about that briefly too, the role of having a good coach. I think no matter who you are, at some point in your lifting journey, getting the assistance of someone else, just some oversight to see, especially if you've been maybe a lone wolf this entire time, to see, hey, is this maybe the best approach for me personally, and can someone else help me out, is a good idea. So 3D Muscle Journey, highly recommended. Eric, teed it up. Talk to me, man, about y'all.
Oh, well, that's, first off, that's very generous. And we sell, identical PDFs via our Instagrams to anyone who's interested. That gives a stock standard template for what to eat with zero communication at a low fee of $999. So if
It
that
was
doesn't
weird.
get you
My template
success,
said at the top Matt Ogus, but I assume that was just like, that was
so
yeah.
so you understand the concept of negging someone, right?
Yes.
It's just a solid motivational tool. It's, I frequently will do it with my wife. I'll just call her the name of my ex-girlfriend from high school, and I just assume it will improve our relationship in some way.
Yeah. Stoke the
Most
fire.
of the time, it results in me having to sleep on the couch. But you know what? I'm sure it'll work eventually. No, but in all seriousness, so 3D Muscle Journey, we do coaching. We work with people, and I can't recommend my colleagues highly enough. I act as the chief science advisor to them, so it is my role to make sure that the art of coaching that they all have so down pat is supported by the latest science. And if you ever want to get a feel for what that's like before you commit to working with us, go ahead and listen to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. It's been going on for 5 years.
Oh, yeah. Huge. Eric, this is an interesting general question, but I think talking about the cultural aspect, because I'm culture, history, science, culture, this individual wants to know, who are some of your favorite current natural lifters? And I want to ask you about natural bodybuilders, because I honestly know next to nothing. I'll list afterwards some of my favorite current natural, let's say drug-tested powerlifters, but just hip individuals, aware of them, maybe if they just want to, admire someone's physique. I know we had... wow, now it's like almost 2 years ago, but Brian Whitaker on, which, wow. After I looked up, so of course I Googled his ass after the interview, and what an incredibly impressive physique. The floor is yours.
Yeah, no, there's so many. So on the powerlifting side, if you want to follow some awesome IPF and USAPL and other affiliated lifters, there's just some amazing talent out there. Ashton Rushka is absolutely killing the 105s, and I really am looking forward to, once meets can happen regularly, the showdown between him and my friend and colleague and longtime client Bryce Lewis will be amazing. But there's great lifters. We had Russ Swoll on, who is best 83s on the planet.
Yep.
If you look at other lifters, there's a ton. Jessica Butner, who we've had on, Natalie Hansen.
Bro, you did it again. I love you, Eric.
I couldn't pronounce it right. I big ups to name pronunciation being correct. So we've had a lot of really cool powerlifters on, and a lot of them, the ones I named, they post a lot of their lifts online, so you can just see some really impressive technicians just throwing around some big numbers there. On the natural bodybuilding side of things, I've always been a fan, and also, I'm both the president of the Hair Club for Men and a member. No, but seriously, I'm a fan of natural bodybuilding. I coach it and I compete in it, and I've had there's a number of physiques who I've always really appreciated. So, for example, Philip Ricardo Jr. Just has he's not built like the typical bodybuilder that just has like the short arms, well proportioned, relatively short, kind of squat body. It's a classic mesomorph. But he has more of a kind of an ectomorphic build. Maybe this is why I like the way he's built, because he's been very successful. Huge legs, freaky vascularity. And he is, I would say he's right up there with some of the other folks who are known for getting incredibly lean. Philip Ricardo Jr. has gnarly glute striations. This looks like he doesn't have fat cells, and just incredible quad development. And is just muscular all over, and just really dense and grainy, and it's got an amazing side triceps. He's, I would say he's probably one of the most well-won natural bodybuilders out there. He's won titles across 3 or 4 different federations. And then, of course, Brian Whitaker. If we're going to talk about leanness and balance and symmetry, he's the top. And I would say I've watched him compete from the mid-2000s all the way up to thus far what has been the peak of his career, when he won both the Yorton Cup and WMBF Worlds in 2015, coming in probably the leanest I've ever seen anybody, which is pretty amazing. Speaking of leanness again, I was going to keep going down this track. Brett Freeman, who is good friend, someone I've had the honor of working with. He's been a 3DMJ athlete, always reps the squad. He's been around since he was a late teen with an impressive physique, and now he's no longer a late teen. And he's still killing it, and now he's a 2-time WMBF champ in his weight class in the pro division. I believe he's won both a lightweight and a bantamweight title, and he gets incredibly lean and just has a really nice balanced physique, incredible legs, incredible leanness. So those are some of the folks that stand out in my mind, but there's so many tons of great competitors out there. Those are some of my favorites. Also, a little bit of a throwback. I love John Harris's physique. Just really well balanced, kind of I would say he's a classic example of someone with, of course, superior genetics, as he's competing at the pro natural world level and has won world titles. But he has certainly gone up against people who have a little more mesomorphic, round muscle belly kind of looks. So he's stood with giants and used his hard work to come out on top, or at least definitely hang toe to toe with them, which is always a cool thing to see. So yeah, that was mostly the male division, which, because I compete, that's kind of where I have a lot of my focus. But there's so many. I would just encourage people to check out the WNBF, check out the IPF, and there's a lot of really cool lifters out there to watch. And man, there's amazing amateurs too. I talked a lot about the pros, but there's a lot of good lifters out there, a lot of good bodybuilders.
So many fantastic names. Just a few more I'll throw in. And then I actually want to talk, because recently there was, I think it's called the Hybrid Showdown. It was the meet that happened in Florida for untested lifters, but man, so many records shattered there. I do want to say, as you said, Jessica, there's going to be a showdown now. I believe it's 76 kilo with her and another elemental athlete, Daniela Mello, where it's going to be
amazing lifter.
There, and I do have the bias when it comes to the male lifters, where I tend to float around the 83 kg. So of course I know Russ, like we have Sean Noriega, but man, 74. Recently the total that Taylor put up, and just
Taylor Atwood also,
and just that's what I'm saying. And when you said like the showdown, I don't need things to be competitive, Eric, but as a spectator, so I watch a lot of let's say mixed martial arts or any sporting event. I like to see someone excel so much that it's no competition. So they're just in a league of their own. That's always exciting to see. But I also like, and it happens a little less often these days, depends upon the weight class. But when it's tight, it comes down to what, Eric? That third deadlift. So you setting up where you said about potentially Ashton, Bryce Lewis, that's an incredibly exciting meet if that was to happen with two of them. It actually almost reminds me of 2016 when it was John Hack against Brett Gibbs, as an example.
Oh, yeah.
In America. And it's a spectacle. And I remember that very quickly in 2015, Jeremy Hamilton, a buddy of mine, where he went to Boss of Bosses 2, and he faced off actually against Dan Green, who was the current record holder in that weight class. And they were lifting in the same meet, and it all came down to the third deadlift. And I've never felt that electricity in a powerlifting meet. And Jeremy pulled it, won, broke the then record at the time. The feeling, the very tangible feeling of that electricity. Whew! So I just wanted to say real quick too that I know the individual asked about natural lifters, but some of the untested lifters, I think just the talent pool only keeps increasing. Recently, Dan Bell shattered the all-time records. I think it's over 2,600. You had just some major pulls, some major lifting. John Hack, speaking which his total, where he benched, so I'm going to get the number wrong, and Eric, you might know more than me. He was 90 kilo, and it was 270 kilos that he did. No, 260. It was 260. So he's approaching a 3 times body weight bench press. Like just insane lifts across the board. And then Jamal was going for a 900-pound deadlift as well. Just
one-rounder, yep.
Yeah, just lifts that. Let's say 6 years ago, 5 years ago, if any of these lifts were done, would have shattered the internet for the day,
Yeah, 100%.
So it's just I think it's a great time to be a fan, an enthusiast of lifting, whether it's, strength sports or if it's bodybuilding. Whew. Eric, here's a question.
I got to give a quick shout out to, I was just thinking of the most impressive lineup I've seen in natural bodybuilding, just to go along a little more. I believe it was 2012 or 2011, but it was I think the first year of the pro show at what is now the Muscle Mayhem, and I think it was still the Muscle Mayhem back then, but it's called the Pro USA, and it was under the flag of the IFPA at the time.
Yeah.
And here were the top 5. All right, Philip Ricardo Jr., Kiyoshi Moody, who is a division winner at the Team Universe back in the day, multiple time, and has also won the Natural Olympia. Panix Pierre, who is now an IFBB pro, and he was at the top of all the natural ranks, as well as Cleveland Thomas, who is a Yorton Cup and a world's champ in the WNBF, and then Moji Alua. That was the top 5, who was also a pro winner, and God, I don't think he's won a world title. But seeing all 5 of those individuals on the same stage battling it out, was absolutely incredible. So yeah, just if anyone wants to look at any of those names, take a look and you'll see some of the most impressive natural physiques out there.
Beautiful hunks of man meat. Eric, this is so I'm not only asking this question so we can really categorize ourselves in the sexual health and wellness category of, podcasts, but this is a genuine question that this individual has. And I can't say I've experienced it, but I do want to talk about something after, which is constipation when it comes to leaning down, because that is something, I can say has been potentially an issue. This person said, do you feel your libido becomes damaged or diminished when you're at the very end stages of a cut? And I think that's why I'm not even trying to be funny. I don't think I've been lean enough to experience that. I think there's a certain level that you have to attain before that becomes an issue. You've coached hundreds of bodybuilders, Eric. Can you just walk through, let's assume this person's getting pretty darn lean. What's going on? What's the resolution here? How long is it going to be sad for? How long is it going to be an F in the chat?
Well, I think there's 3 factors that can impact that. If you go on a really hardcore cut and just slash your calories if you go on a 40% deficit,
right?
You might notice your libido drop in a couple weeks, to be honest.
Yep.
Depending on where you start in terms of your body fat and how you approach that. If you go on a very slow, steady cut over a long period of time and you're not starting lean, you may not notice anything. In some cases, you might even notice certain hormonal markers improve, depending on where you start again. And then if you no matter how you dice it, even if you do everything right, if you get super lean, there will be a point where there's nothing you can do about it. And so as an example, for 2019, I started my contest prep at 89 kilos, which just under 200 pounds. We'll say 196, I think. And I was up to 220 the prior year in 2018. And I did a mini cut in April and then September, October, before then kind of going on maintenance, bringing up my calories and starting my diet a couple months after that in 2019. So I got down from 100 down to around 94 and then 94 down to around 89, which I held until I started. During the cut where I lost 6 kilos, which is 13 pounds, and the second cut where I lost 5 kilos, which is 11 pounds. And I got down to 89 kilos, which is if anyone saw my pictures where I started my contest prep, I wasn't shredded by any means, but I was really pleased with that as a quote unquote off-season body. I had quad separation, I had full abs, I had, bicep veins. You could see a little bit of hamstrings if I flexed them. So I was probably hanging around just a touch over, maybe 10 to 12% somewhere in there, a really good place to hang out. And I didn't have any negative impact on my libido at all. So that was kind of what I describe, or what I think, and what normally is associated with a lack of symptoms is kind of the low end of my settling point, where I can't go out to eat every night and maintain that physique. And I'm not hungry or food focused. But if I eat like an off-season bodybuilder, not being careful, and I'm certainly not food focused, and no sleep disturbance, nothing like that, I can hang on to that indefinitely. And that's not a place where I'm probably going to make great progress if I don't actually start putting on weight. But it's a great place to start a contest prep, and I had no issue there. So I think what that means is that if you are having significant drops in libido during the course of a cut, you're probably doing one of 2 things, which I wouldn't recommend, is cutting too fast or too hard, or trying to get so lean that it's not sustainable. The only time this might happen that is not one of those 2 things is when you've just been on a really long cut for a long time and you had a lot of body fat to lose. And I'd recommend maybe just breaking that up into chunks. And we've talked about it before, taking diet breaks, which I think when you have a lot of weight to lose has a benefit. And there's actually data to back this up. Some of the studies we have on diet breaks show greater maintenance of lost weight in follow-ups in long term. If you look at Byrne and colleagues 2017, that was a finding in men with obesity. I would recommend breaking it up because it gives you the opportunity to practice maintenance. And you might find that some of those ill effects of this long diet you've been on, they start to fade and maybe your libido comes back.
Perfect. Hang in there. Eric, someone's finally ready to start incorporating deloads into their training. Normally they just go balls to the wall, to quote them. How does one, let's say if you are more of your typical gym bro lifter where, you train at a certain requisite intensity every single week. Sure, if you go too hard for too long, you might dial it back a little bit, but you're always doing a certain amount of volume, and you find that maybe you're not achieving the results you want. This person sounds like they're a little bit frustrated with their progress, or maybe they just want for longevity to start incorporating deloads. For someone who hasn't really had it programmed for them before, either in a strength program or even hypertrophy, how do you start incorporating a deload?
So I think there's an interesting conceptual thing here is that, deloads are a tool to manage the acute buildup of fatigue. Yep. And fatigue fades much faster than the fitness adaptations you got. So it's basically hitting pause on your gains, but diminishing the fatigue so you can then push hard again. Now, if you've for months or years been able to train quote unquote balls to the wall and you have been making progress, I mean, if you're stagnant, then yeah, I would recommend this is something you need to do. But if you've been training quote unquote balls to the wall and making progress that whole time, you haven't been training hard enough to where you actually think you're probably not actually training balls to the wall. Maybe you're going to failure on everything, but the volume's low enough, or the frequency is low enough where you clearly haven't needed a deload in terms of the true definition of the word need as you've progressed. So when you are really actually pushing the amount of stress you can through your system, and I don't mean this to sound condescending or like that I'm one-upping you on the hardcore scale, but it's pretty obvious if you're training to the point where you just need a deload, and that is actually the barrier to your progress. And that's because you start to see strength get really erratic. You get aches and pains, your sleep gets disturbed, you get less motivated to train, and you're stagnant at best in terms of progressing and loads in the gym. So if that's not happening, that doesn't mean you wouldn't be better with deloads. You might be carrying an unnecessary level of fatigue, but I do think it's probably best to have some system where you enact deloads. I normally do a checklist at the end of every mesocycle where I ask the clients a number of yes or no questions. Are you more or less motivated to train than normal? Are you more or less stressed than normal? These are yes, no. Is your sleep better or worse than normal? Are your aches and pains worse than normal? And then assess whether or not your performance is actually going down or not. And if the answer is yes to two or more of those, then the answer is probably take an easy week. And the way you do that is by dropping volume, I would say by at least 1/3 up to 2/3, and cutting volume in half's a decent idea. You can roughly maintain intensity, but I probably wouldn't train to failure. You can have close proximity to failure, but just cut your volume in half. And if there's any specific movements you're doing that tend to bother any joints or cause aches and pains, you can just drop, say, for example, like maybe low bar squats and deadlifts that week, and just do something else. Do a back extension, do a leg press, and then come back to it the next week just to give yourself a break. If you do replace a movement, don't replace it with something totally new or you'll be sore. So that's the only caveat to that advice. And I think that's a pretty good strategy for like a week-long deload, is implement it based on the need to do so. Lack of progress, lack of motivation, fatigue, pain, etc. And then once you do, go in pretty aggressively. Don't just drop it by a set here or there, or stop one set of shy of failure. When I say drop, volume by 1/3, that means drop one set off everything if you're doing 3 sets on everything. And if I'd say cut it in half, that means something should, if you're doing 3 sets, should only be 1 set. There should be 2.
Eric, they squat over 400 pounds and then they've been training for strength for a long time, but they want some meals on wheels. I'm assuming they're not satisfied with their overall hypertrophy in their legs. One thing I would recommend to everyone, if you're listening, you could go ahead and search on YouTube, is Eric actually did a fantastic overview on my channel talking about training. And this was around training around kind of hip pain, or basically training more volume for size, but search just Helms, Omar, legs, add whatever you want in between, but there's like a 20-minute video where you give this entire overview. But for someone, so let's say, Eric, let's tee this up. So someone likely, sure, you've been training more for strength. What does that mean? Probably intensity is a little bit higher. You might be having high frequency of a specific movement, so you might be squatting a decent amount, but what's your overall volume looking like week to week? I'm assuming because he wants to grow meals on wheels that he feels there's something he's missing. Let's assume then he's doing more of a strict or pure strength program where maybe volume's a little bit lower than we would typically see in a bodybuilding bodybuilding program. He's been doing it for a while, so congratulations. Just to tee it up, that the person is squatting over 400 pounds. I don't know the body weight. So strength is
600 pounds.
Yeah. So
they're squatting 3/4 body weight.
Eric, when we do the Canadian conversion, I'm pretty sure he's doing 800 pounds. So congrats on you for hitting a world record. But he's just looking in the mirror, the man in the mirror. Okay, yeah, the proverbial man in the mirror, and he ain't happy, bro. He wants to get juicier. So if he's built now a decent amount of strength and he's looking to diversify his goals, so he wants to add some meat on them ham hocks, what does he do? What's it look like next, his training? How does he start manipulating those variables?
Great question, and I appreciate you providing some assumptions because we have to work
narrow
from
it down.
Someone just says, I want bigger legs. I go, cool, me too. And then I have nothing to say because I don't know if they're doing too much volume, not enough, if they lift weights or what. Are they dieting? I know nothing.
Yeah.
So if we assume this person is training like a proverbial power lifter, and they probably are if they built their squat up to 400 pounds, well done. I would normally recommend 2 things, and that is probably getting yourself into a calorie surplus and doing more work on your legs. However, that second piece, doing more work on your legs, if you maintain a powerlifting paradigm that can often become unsustainable, trying to do, let's say increasing your volume by 20% on your leg movements, if that's squats and deadlifts, that's going to really quickly rack up a lot of fatigue and potential joint pain and probably become the bottleneck that prevents you from actually doing that level of work productively. So instead, I would probably move towards a more minimalistic approach on what do you need to maintain your strength on the squat. So maybe you have 1 day per week where you work up to a single and do a back offset or 2, but not much more. And then you start to diversify your portfolio. And you maybe choose 3 or 4 exercises for quads and 2 to 3 exercises for hams and glutes. Certainly you can keep a squat in there. If you're currently doing low bar for powerlifting, maybe you could try some high bar. Yep. Or maybe you could try some safety bar, or maybe you could try some front squats if you really enjoy choking on high reps front squats. And then I think depending on what you have access to, there are some great machines out there. Leg press and it allows you to kind of deload your spine while you're still getting a lot of leg work. Leg extension, pretty much the only way to effectively train your rectus femoris compared to a squat program if you want to not just be growing those vasti. And then I think, some of the more isolated stuff that you see more physique athletes do, like a kickback, abduction, hip thrust, RDLs, things like that would be a nice thing to populate your program with. And overall, what you're looking to do is increase your total volume if you conceptualize it as sets per muscle group on the lower body, while decreasing the amount of stress that you're putting on your lumbar, spine, and hips. By choosing different exercises and limiting the total amount of work you do on heavy compound free weight movements like deadlifts and squats.
Every time I see Bryce Lewis do the pit shark or some such movement, I have a little bit of silent jealousy, Eric, because when I had access to the Gym Fortis we have, I actually won't name the brand. I'll just say it's a belt squat, but you can't squat beyond parallel without it, no matter what, without it touching. And so that's the limit of it. And I'm seeing my boy Bryce looking wonderful. They're taking a little bit of a load off the spine, but still getting that requisite volume for his legs. And I just think to myself, one day, there actually was, have you ever tried real quick? It's novel. I've seen a few weightlifting gyms do it, but they basically rig up their own version of a belt squat. Johnny's
stand on blocks.
Yeah.
Wear a chain between your legs and just put the weights there. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
100%.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
That's the original belt squat.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder where, and then we asked this question and weightlifting coaches are just going to sigh. It's like, well, actually, it's like, where did it first originate in weightlifting? What weightlifting camp? And you can hear like 5 different responses.
It's a question for Connor Heffernan.
Our boy Connor, which actually, so I'll ask a funny question and then maybe perhaps the last, because it's a nice little capstone to this Q&A, a well-rounded question afterwards. But someone asked the question and said, who's your favorite Irishman? And I assume that they're talking about, fitness related. And my initial, Eric, just being completely transparent, impulsive response was Danny Lennon, because I don't want to get murdered. But like that's not maybe my final answer, because again, I just said that in jest, and that was merely comedy and not me fearing for my life in reality and sending out a help signal into the masses to rescue me from any potential macabre situation.
I don't think it's pronounced macabre.
Mockerbee?
I think it's just macabre.
Mockerbee.
Mockerbee is the Australian version, I think. Yeah, it's the cousin to the wallaby. the dark cousin of the wallet. I think it's macabre. Now I got to look it up. So, Omar, why don't you tell me your real answer?
You don't leave this? Look, don't worry.
No,
okay.
no, you got to tell me your. I'll answer too, but I want to know your real answer.
Yeah.
To the.
Wow, that's. I mean,
Irishman.
So let me give some shine on.
Macabre.
What do you think?
What's
Macabre.
Macabre.
macabre? Macabre.
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 Here, one more time from Google.
Macabre.
Oh yeah, macabre. Yeah.
Yeah, you were pretty close, actually. I shouldn't have
fine.
said anything. That's my bad.
Hey, look. I corrected you over the Jessica Bittner. It's totally fair because I said the only reason why I said that, Eric, is because she's going to come after me, and then she's going to say, "God, you guys really don't know my name." And I joked about it, but I told Jessica, if you're listening, I did think that was how you pronounce your last name, Bootner, and she said, "Oh, I thought you were doing that, as a joke." And I said, "No." So I just jumped.
I would
ahead
never
of that
do that to you.
Yeah.
So it's Bittner. Yeah. Just for the record, everybody. Okay.
Hey, but I was gonna say, hard to choose. I want to narrow it down to favorite Irish fitness person because Danny Lennon, to give him a shout out, Sigma Nutrition. Come on, man, that's some fire right there. Connor Heffernan on our podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad you narrowed it down to fitness because I was thinking of a cereal I ate as a child. That's probably borderline racist, but I do have Irish blood, so that's allowed. Yeah. And that statement itself is probably also borderline racist.
We're going to dance out of this one. But so, favorite fitness?
Fitness person from Ireland. It's hard not to go with Danny, to be honest. Yeah. I mean, now, don't get me wrong. Dr. Heffernan is rapidly climbing those ranks. And if those out there are interested in the history component of history, science, and culture, and you're going, you know what, I feel like reading something, and you happen to be a subscriber to Mass, Dr. Heffernan has got a guest article to drop on you.
Yep.
And it's out the 1st of March, which by the time this episode is out, I think it'll have happened or be very close to coming out. So keep your eyes peeled for an excellent historical account of the history of bodybuilding diets and how they've changed and why. And I tell you what, the man can not only give us the gift of gab about history, but he's also got the pen, which is mightier than the sword, which is not relevant because he doesn't have a sword, but he's good at writing and speaking, folks, and definitely check out the next issue of Mass. So let me say, Danny Lennon, he first had me on Sigma Nutrition Radio in 2012. Okay. So I'm going on a nearly 10-year relationship with him. And I have to say, could be because of the geographical distance, but I have met Danny in person 4 or 5 times. He stayed in my home. And the fact that I'm alive says that some part of that gaping hole where a heart should be beats for me. So I give the love right back, or his closest, approximation of that. Yeah. And while I love Connor, while I love Dr. Heffernan, I've just got this 9 years of camaraderie with Danny. So yeah.
Yeah, you've invested a lot of time in it. And Eric, I think the easy way for us to get out of this and select one is, hey, Danny, Connor actually now lives in Austin. So he's an Irishman living in Austin, whereas Danny, as I understand it, is still in the homeland. So it's like we're asking the question and then we're narrowing it down. We're narrowing it down even further. Well,
we don't know where Danny is right now. Let's not make any assumptions.
That's true. Yeah. Hopefully not doing anything Maccabee, so.
He's out in Australia with the Maccabees, folks.
This is the question now. I think that would be the nice capstone because it also is relevant from our conversation about P ratios.
So, Omar, would you say the question we just had was the penultimate question?
It would be, yeah. It's the one before the ultimate.
Okay. All right, I'll take it.
Yeah. So, how do you determine when to end a bulk? And I know, wow, God, that's such a general question here. But let's assume that someone, once again, I'm giving a whole lot of context that isn't there. Because you have to, I mean, when you ask a question on the IG story, to be fair to a lot of these questions, there's a character limit. There's a hard character limit. But what are the general constraints then, Eric, that you recommend for someone when they ask that question? How do you determine when to end a bulk? And let's assume that it's a little bit more strength focused. I don't know if that narrows it down, anything, but let's assume they're looking to get yucky. And I'm going to throw in one more contextual component. Let's assume that they are motivated by the way their body looks, or their motivation is tied to the way their body looks. So they tend to be a little bit more adherent the leaner they are. So maybe that's a consideration for them. You know, like the typical gym bro, like, oh, I'm getting away from being lean. I feel terrible. Okay, let me order McDonald's. So that's a component. That's a component there.
Okay. So first, I would reference the movie Akira.
Wow.
That's a decent guideline, I think. There, when you start to inadvertently kill people around you with your mass, safety purposes would be the recommendation there.
Yep.
And the joke online has always been, when do you end your bulk? When you hate yourself. And however, the semi-true subtext there is that when you go on a bulk and when you're trying to gain weight, it is very normal to not necessarily like that you get a little less definition and you gain a little body fat in that process. However, I think a lot of the times the bar for when you start to not like what you see in the mirror is set inappropriately low, probably from the influence of society and social media, that we have expectations of being lean that would essentially ask us to be in a perpetual diet, which is unhealthy and counterproductive. So I think it's easy to say, like, you know, I give you the choice. This is your body. I want you to bulk to the point where you're not comfortable in your own skin, then feel free to cut. But with the caveat that, you know, if you're someone who is only happy when you're in a place where you have to be deprived or restricted to be there, I think it's important to look inward instead of outward as to what your what those motivating factors are and what those standards you're applying yourself to are based on. So that's obviously a much deeper question that we can't really tackle here. But as far as other factors, you know, some people have taken this whole, you know, the P ratio data does not indicate that there's any inhibition of hypertrophy as you gain more body fat to mean, what, then we're just supposed to get up to 40% body fat? And my thought is, who said that? Like, what are you talking about? We just said that it's not getting in the way of you gaining muscle. However, getting up, in the example I just gave, to 40% body fat would probably have metabolic consequences. You know, like one of the things we mentioned was that while some of the linemen in these football studies had basically the starting of diabetes, you know, they had metabolic disorder and metabolic syndrome, and they were insulin resistant, it wasn't getting in the way of their gains, but they were insulin resistant. That's not something you want, you know? So there are potentially health consequences of letting your body fat get really, really out of control. So, you know, like anything, see your GP on an annual basis, which, you know, get blood work done and make sure you're healthy. And if you notice that in the course of your bulk, you are starting to see some of those markers get worse, that might be a decent sign of when to cap it. And you also want to make sure that your bulk, we'll go back to your framing, Omar, which, thank you. If your framing is that you're trying to gain weight for strength, a good way to gauge whether your pace and the amount of weight you're putting on is actually quote unquote functional. And what I mean by that is not standing on a Bosu ball, but functional for your function of trying to get stronger. See if your Wilks score is actually going up. Because if your Wilks score is going down while you're gaining weight, it's hard to argue that the weight you're gaining is really doing a lot for you, at least acutely, in terms of strength. Maybe once you go to a peaking phase, you'll realize a whole lot of gains, but I haven't seen that happen consistently. So just be aware that if you're putting on a lot of weight, you're trying to get stronger, and your relative strength, which was represented by your Wilks score, is going down, you may be being a little too aggressive with it or gaining an unnecessary amount of size. That's the last caveat I would give Omar.
I'm just picturing that Akira Tetsuo just massing on massing like that. That's some real massing right there, Eric. I do want to say real briefly,
and lean too. That's
know,
one thing I noticed about those Akira gains. You can see veins in that. You know,
the vascularity was on point. I will say that often I think one of the things a lifter has to become accustomed to is also being temporarily, in certain respects, a little uncomfortable with the way things are going. Both, if you talk about a strength journey, Eric, where I think a lot of novices or intermediate lifters are under this assumption that your strength, like however your best lifts, you always should be, within striking distance or within, 3%, 4%, and you have one off day. Oh man, you mean I lost all the strength? Like I get sometimes panicky DMs of someone wondering, it's like, well, you're not in a peaking block, you're deep into fatigue, maybe in the program that you're currently in, and lifts aren't going how they used to. Yeah, no shit, because the situation is different, the variables are different, the environment's different. And so being not comfortable with the uncomfortable, but with almost the unknown too, where someone, if they're bulking, if they, now they can't see their abs anymore, and they're wondering what's underneath the hood, but you don't know until you lean down. So you're reaching for that unknown, and there's that level of being uncomfortable because you don't know, and maybe your current state is not exactly where you want to be, but it's a short-term sacrifice for a long-term gain. I think choices only made with the short-term in mind can be often a little blind when you think about the overarching goals that one might have. So it is, I think, a function of just being a long-term lifter that you become accustomed to some of those things, like the fluctuations that might occur.
Well said. No, I agree with that 100%. It's so easy for once you, like your best case scenario, like your North Star was shining. You wished on a shooting star. The plates you loaded all happened to be the ones in the gym that were half a pound less than they're meant to be. Peaked out of your mind. Caffeine timing was perfect. Serum levels are maxed out, and you hit a 450 squat. Now, if that is like your new normal, like, oh yeah, I can squat 450 any day. Like, no, you can't. that is your best case, like upper end of your strength fluctuation range of training, and you can easily expect 5, 6, 7% less than that just to be a kind of normal day-to-day, nothing's even really wrong. And maybe 10% less than that when you're going through a phase of maybe you had to take a little bit of time off, had a minor ouchie, you cycled out that lift, and you came back to it. But the good news is you will get rapidly back to within a couple percent of it. And then if you go through another peaking block, hopefully you'll see yourself slightly higher than that 450 as an example. That's how you know if you're doing it right.
Yeah.
It is not linear.
Yeah.
It is definitely these kind of peaks and crests of waves that are hopefully getting higher over time. But the latency between those peaks being higher than one another increases over time, meaning if it took you 6 months to move from 450 to 460, 2 years from now, it might take you a year before you move to 480 to 490, even though it's a similar absolute change. So anyway, just it's hard to have that patience when you haven't been in the game long enough to develop that patience and to kind of have that 20/20 vision looking backwards. But trust in the process to give you a platitude that isn't helpful.
We can't help you. You're on your own, and it's not going to work out. But best of luck.
Perfectly said.
Deuces, wish you the best. Now, I'll say this in closing, Eric. One, this was a fun episode, a nice change of pace. I will say, likely probably in the next several months, we'll do another one of these. But if you actually want your question to be fully read out loud with all the context, all the nuance that you want, go ahead now. Now's the opportunity on YouTube, because that's where you can leave a lengthy comment, to leave a comment with your question. Because once again, the Instagram story, what is it? You're allowed a sentence max. So I understand that's where we filled in some of the blanks, and I filled in some of those blanks that I thought would be helpful in a general respect to the average listener listening. But go ahead, leave us your questions, and we will revisit this another time, probably a few months from now. So that'd be on the YouTube channel, and it'd be specifically for this episode, titled, insert title here, Brandon.
Perfect. Perfect. And Brandon will know exactly what to do with that. Brandon's going to message me and goes, what do I do with that?
It was actually funny when he asked me about that. Remember, we did the joke where it's like, Brandon, delete this. He said, am I supposed to delete this? I said, Eric acted well there.
Yep. And I'm sure he's not annoyed. That's like the third time that's happened. So I'm now in the habit of, when we do that in an episode, I clarify as to whether or not we're being serious. So, yeah. So shout out to Brandon, everybody.
Yeah.
Give him a hand. If you're sitting alone in your car with family, especially if you're around other people and there's no context, just start clapping right now. We really appreciate that. Brandon will appreciate that. The people around you will ask questions, and you can tell them how awesome Brandon is.
Yeah.
And, we'll spread the good news.
Hey, last thing I'll say, his name is Brandon Wells. He's also an excellent photographer. If you're looking for, in all seriousness, he's the fire photos that you saw that I posted on my IG, because I was just proud of my boy being both Eric and then also Brandon taking the photo. Some of those physique shots or just anything at all. Excellent photo in the Texas area. Likely, hopefully, we'll be working together at some point in the future. I just want to say before we close out that you could leave a rating review also on iTunes, because we will be reading them. And let's see, Eric, I am not sure if there is a review in New Zealand. If someone has left a review, but we'll read one of those, so we enjoy reading them no matter what, no matter the outcome. That's what people say that fail. No matter the outcome, let's just have fun. I mean, we'll read them no matter the star, no matter the rating. And we're back every single Monday with another fire episode of Iron Culture.